Hello everyone. So just to introduce you quickly to what we'll be covering in week 4, we'll be continuing with the shield effect and starting with basically setting up the shaders for the sphere itself. So we'll be doing slightly more complex shading tasks, procedural noises, and making sure that that's all driven as well by the projectiles and the impact points. After that we'll move on to creating our more sci-fi elements, so making sure we get some geometric shapes in there. So that will take up about the first half of the week, just getting those layers down and even doing our first quick comp of all of those. The second half of the week will focus on the secondary elements. So much like with the portal, we wanted to add a bunch of more naturalistic effects around the magical effects to really sell it. So we'll finish up on the projectiles themselves, add some sparks and some smoke from the impact points, and just make sure that the sparks are also affecting the environment and everything is lighting the environment and the character. So a bunch of shading and some extra effects on the shield itself, and then secondary effects, and spending quite a lot of time in comp getting this all pulled together. So I hope you guys enjoy the week, and I'll see you in the next video. Hi, and welcome to week 4, which is we're going to try and wrap up this shield and comp it all together with the portal, and that'll be the end of scene 1 shot 1. So for now we do have some particle layers and the beginnings of some of these sci-fi elements I've been planning to add. But I think we should get some of the more boring stuff out the way now, because as we've done before, I think it's important at some point to render out what you have and start a small composite of that, just in case something comes up while we're compositing. We understand, oh look, we need an extra layer that'll give us this or that, so it's very useful to at least start comping while you're working on it. So for now we'll do, I think, the actual sphere. So if we look at some of the reference I've been looking at, just to keep the inspiration going, there's this shield from Halo, which is pretty cool. And there's a few elements in here that I think we need to replicate. One of them being the refraction, which we can manage in the comp. The second thing is they have the geometric shapes. So in this case hexagons, and you'll see hexagons on a lot of these more sci-fi inspired force fields. So we'll probably steer clear from that particular shape for this effect, and maybe see what else we can come up with. And then on top of that, and I think it's really important, is this reflective layer. So even though it's completely transparent, there's a subtle sheen and a bunch of highlights, and here it's reflecting the clouds, and it just looks really, really cool having something reflective. So we do need to take our base sphere and actually apply a shader, a reflective shader to that, and maybe some noises that we can use in comp as well. So if we jump back over here, let's try and assemble a sphere here ready for shading. So I have our animated shield here. And let's just take that. Bring it down here because I want to transfer one of these sims so that we get a point color that we can work with in the shader. So the idea here is, if I have, well, let's say I put down a color, make it black, and if we take this sim, we can affect the color of that sphere with an attribute transfer, and then if I apply noises in the shader, I can multiply those noises by the color of the particle effects, which should do some pretty good stuff, I think. So I need to move that into position, and I'm going to take our color multiplier here as well. And on the subject of noises in comp, let's have a look at what we have, because I need to subdivide this for one, because I'm going to be transferring color to these points, so I need a bit of a higher resolution mesh. And secondly, I'm going to time shift to our opening frame, which is 124, and put down a rest position. So now if I apply a noise in comp, I can simply use rest P instead of P to add the noise. So when the shield moves, it doesn't move through the noise pattern. So we've got that. And then we need our color. So here's one of our sims. And this is the color based on the age. And we don't need P-scale and alpha. And then we simply attribute transfer that. Right, so here we get our very messy attribute transfer of the sim. So I just want to blend that on, and we can use the sample count here to smooth this off. Need to go pretty high. Something like that, and I'm also going to clamp the age. Here we are multiplying the color by the age. So just so that our color attribute doesn't take over the entire shield, I can reduce this ramp here, which is a ramp of age divided by life. And if we look at our points, we're just making sure that some of the older points die a little bit quicker. So never take over the entire sphere. So that looks pretty cool. We can use this now to multiply our noises. So something like that can be our renderable sphere, which will hold our reflections, and then I can make extra passes inside the shader to render out in Mantra. So we'll set that as the renderable, and I'll put down a material network. And this is good because we have a material network which contains our portal shaders over here separately, and we'll just have one here for shield shaders. And I'm going to put down a material builder. I've been having problems with the MatNet before. It might be fixed now, but I couldn't get extra image planes to work directly from this context unless I'm doing something wrong. So we'll see how this works for me. So we don't need any of these. We need that to output the shader. I don't think we need that. Let's put down a principled. And here we don't need anything fancy, so we just need a sphere that reflects. And then I can maybe just play with the roughness value to get the right kind of reflection. So let's call this shield base and apply it to our object here. Okay, here we go. Put down a mantra. Call this effects shield. So I think I'm going to leave everything here at default. I don't think there's anything we need to change or worry about right now. Let's just start with rendering what we've got and see where we need to take it. So let me save. And we need effect shield. Okay, so there's our basic shield. I'm not seeing any reflections. So let me just go jump back into the shader here and plug this in. I forgot about this. Doesn't make a difference. Oh, there we go. So we're getting our reflection now. So we don't need to use point color on this pass because we just need a good reflection from this. So I could even maybe make this black. You can see if I brighten it up, there's a good amount of the ground and some of these open windows over here. So maybe just reduce the roughness, make it a little bit more glossy. So something like that is pretty much all we need. Obviously I could tweak some of these values like metallicity. Make it fully... Oh, that didn't do what I expected it to. More metallic appearance. Well, I'm not sure if that... I mean, as far as I know, metallicity should be slightly reducing the diffuse intensity of the shader. So unless I've got that wrong, I mean, I guess it is black, so maybe that's the reason why. I'll leave it like this for now. Kind of does what I need it to do. So we have a reflective ball. So that's what our output will be if we render this sphere. So now let's see what else we can get. So we do have a rest position. So let's call that in here. And I'm using this with a noise so that the noise doesn't end up swimming through the shield as the shield's moving. So that's a vector. So let's see, I'm going to drop down a unified noise. Just trying to figure out a good way to visualize this. I can switch off reflectivity for now and plug anything I'm working on into emission. Just so I can visualize the noises. So basically here I want my noise to be based on our rest position. And I think I want to use this unified noise static, if I remember. we go. I'm just going to set an emission color. Okay, so here we're getting a noise. And at the same time, let me bind in the color attribute, which will be the point color that we've attribute transferred onto the sphere. And just double check that that's working as well. Yep. So let's see if we can get some creative results from our noises. And the thought process here is exactly the same as with the portal. So I have a bunch of interesting, cool particle effects, but I need layers of more broad stroke colors, or broad stroke, at least masks, that'll help the smaller, highly detailed effects feel like they fit together. So I can have lots of detailed layers, but I need something basic to fill in the gaps of all of those particles and make it feel like a more cohesive effect. So if I can come up with a few noises here that aren't too detailed, they should help merge all of our extra effects layers together. So let's see what we have here. Let's go with my favorite Wall-E. I'm actually going to drop the resolution down just so we can be a bit quicker. And remove the environment, so we'll just have the shield. Okay, I mean, I kind of like a Wall-E by itself, but I guess we need to do something extra with it. Let's see, maybe add a fractal. Make it at least slightly more detailed. This is cool, like kind of netting. I can imagine that working quite well with a shield, actually, and I haven't really done anything to it, and I'm wondering if this is a pretty good layer just to go with. So 1D noise is all we need. We have some roughness. I could warp this a bit. Which is also cool, but it's kind of taking away from what was making that interesting. Yeah, I kind of like that. If we multiply this by our color, then we get that noise only happening where our particles are affecting the sphere. So I'm going to just broaden up this transfer. Just see if I can get a bit extra here. I think maybe I can change this as well. Yeah, that's cool. So it's wide enough that we should be able to see this kind of pattern just underneath our particle layers. So what else can we get? We can, let's duplicate this noise. And I'm going to put a turbulent noise. And edit this rest position by adding turbulence to its position here before it goes into the noise. So we'll do our own kind of warp. And that's just crazy cool. I love that. So you get some really organic looking noises just by doing that. And it is giving me an idea. I'm going to switch off our fractal. Let's try a different frequency. You see these kind of arcs. I think they look kind of nice and slightly electrical. So I'm just trying different frequencies here to see how visible we can make those, but I can also put down a ramp. So I can see them quite nicely there, so let's go with that. And I'll put down, actually I want to offset one of these noises, probably this one. I'm going to just promote this offset value and put a $F in here. So over time, that noise can move through the shield. So while it's being hit, maybe we get a sense of these arcs moving up through the shield. So I'm just testing that animation here on a few frames. That's only 3 frames, so that's way too fast. I'm going to go with 0.02. And then let's put down a ramp here. Because a few things I like to do, for one, is I'm pretty much always putting a ramp at the end of a noise, just so that I can choose what values I have coming out. So you see how we can clamp and just keep what we want. So once again, it's more of an exponential thing. Whether or not I end up actually affecting the ramp or not, it doesn't matter. It's just I'm in the habit of putting down a ramp. And then obviously we could also just, instead of doing that, or as well as doing that, use a power to change our exponent. So let me just boost the amplitude on this noise. So I'm just messing around at this point. With this, I'm trying to find values that give me a visible arc, essentially. So here I'm going back to an unedited ramp and maybe just using exponent. And if it's super low intensity, we can always boost it in the comp. So I'll go with that for now. And if that's moving through the shield, that could look pretty cool. Can also multiply that by our same color. Just trying to see if that's actually working. Oh, wrong thing. There we go. So we have 2 noises there, both being masked by the color on the shield itself, and neither of them need to be inside the shader. We could, or we could just make extra render layers for that. So let's see if we can get that working now. So here the shield we want is simply black with reflectivity. And then we can take this and we should be able to just bind export this. And we call it netting. And choose a vector. And I'll do the same with this one. Arcing. And the last thing I need, if I'm not getting this by default, is either I can use I to give me a normal that will be essentially the Fresnel. I think so, let's try it. Change this all back. I don't know what that's complaining about. No, neither of these is giving me exactly what I thought they would. So let's stick with that. Maybe change this to normal. Let me go with what I thought at first and just export an extra AOV. And I can see what it looks like in the render. If it doesn't work, I can always just use the normals themselves to get a Fresnel type effect. Right, so it's a bit messy, but here is a basic shader for our base shield. Two noises, both being exported as different named extra image planes, and then one which is hopefully useful as a Fresnel. And our reflectivity. So if I jump back out here and let's say extra image planes, we come down here and add our 3. And we have some preset ones in here, but I don't want those. I want normal. I want arcing. And netting. Yeah, so that looks right. That's giving us our direction from the eye, which is the camera. And we've got red and green, so Y, and then in this case X. Oh no, so I think I've gone about this way too complicated, because this is just Z. This is just Z, I think. So I might have been trying to open a whole nother can of worms with using the direction from the surface to the eye. which I have used a bunch of times before. I'm just trying to think. Direction from eye to surface. It's essentially the same as just a normal in this instance, because we have X, Y, and Z here. Regardless, it's doing exactly what I want, because I want this Fresnel type lining. So I'll stick with that. We have our arcing noise. Pretty cool. And obviously I could spend ages working on these noises and come up with some extremely interesting results. I think just messing around with, like, for example, transforming the position before the noise. And obviously there's the lattice warping on the unified noise, and I could combine and multiply different noises together. So this is just very quickly experimenting, seeing something that looks good and outputting. So I'm actually pretty happy with these anyway, because I want them to be pretty subtle, and they're just there to fill in the spaces around the particles. So that looks like about it. I think that's good enough for at least a test render of our shield. So I'll stop this video here, and we'll carry on setting up some shaders and render layers in the next video for our actual particle sims, so we can start to render out some mantras and get a basic comp going. So I'll see you then. Alright, welcome back. So let's carry on, and just to clarify, in the previous video I was saying that we need to kind of get some of the more boring stuff out the way, but I've seen, in terms of shading, that's kind of one of the most powerful and fun aspects you can get, in terms of the amount of stuff you can get done in a shader. And some of my favorite personal effects and effects I've seen have been completely shader driven work, and I can spend days just working on a large shader network to almost completely come up with the effect. And especially with Magic, a lot of what you'll see is largely shader based stuff, and it's super powerful, so that part of it is fun. But to continue on, we're doing general housekeeping in terms of making sure we have renderable geos from the effects we have at the moment, and then just adding a couple of the extra elements. So none of the super fun stuff like the sci-fi things, but we need to, for example, add the environmental impacts into our projectile setup, so we can start rendering those out and set up the renders for our particle layers as well. So let's get stuck in with that, and to start I'm going to take one of these, had a floor. So we have our environment floor here, and then I can pretty much copy whatever I did here for the shield. So we have some scattered points being randomly added, some transforms to apply a direction to the normal, and then the firing time, and our pop net. So I'll take all of that, so we scatter some points around the floor, and we don't need this one, but I need to keep my set up here for the normals. So there, our normals are pointing in the same direction pretty much as the shield ones. And then here we just want this source to switch off, because basically, let's imagine the enemy is firing into the room and they're hitting the ground and they're missing the character, and then at frame 124 is when the shield appears, and all of that gunfire will just be targeting the shield. So we only need this to say $f greater than 124, switch to the null. And here's our popnet, which is adding a particle for 2 frames. And it stops at 124. So we can just merge that straight in over here. And then take a look at our traces. Now something that stands out to me immediately is that I guess because the traces are firing so far into the room, but the ones that hit the shield are a lot closer, so they're appearing a lot longer. So what we might need to do is lengthen these, or do something before 124 to make them look like they belong to the same effect. So let's see, we could do something like, we could put an if statement in this position for 1, because at the moment we have the frame before and the frame of impact are actually very close together, which works fine here, but not so good when our traces are far away. So we could say if $f is less than 124, then do something else, go back to normal. So if it's less than 124, I'll offset this by more. Now why is it complaining? If $f less than 124, then 5 minus the rounded position times 5, else 1 minus the rounded position times 1. I feel like I'm missing a bracket somewhere. There we go. Ooh. So I think that's a lot longer. Yep. So we're shifting that quite a lot. I'll go even more. So now we have traces before 124 should be traveling a greater distance than the ones that are hitting the shield, so that will help. I can do something similar in the scale on Z. So if it's less than 124, then scale it up by 2, otherwise keep it at 1. Yeah, so that's working as well. So we have double the scale and a lot more travel. And I think that already helps make it feel, it's completely fake, but it makes it feel more like it's part of the same gunfire. So that's good enough for me. And that's our projectiles. So let's set up some geos to load all of these layers into, and then I'll probably come back for another video just to make sure we have mantras and shaders set up for all of them, and start rendering. So we need effect shield projectiles, we'll want the particles outside and particles inside. And if you remember, in the portal effect, I actually just kept everything inside the main geo here, and I used a take to switch between them. In this case, I'm just going to make a geo for each one instead. So every single one of these will need to be rendered. That's our base geometry. Which I've set the render flag on here. And then here we'll grab our projectiles. So we can start test rendering that. And here we'll grab some points. Outside and inside. Okay, and then we'll need a shader for each one of those. So let's just do one shader for the projectiles, and then I'll do one shader for all the particle layers. And for the projectiles, what do we need? We need color and alpha. So we need nothing there. We'll keep the principled. I'll switch off reflectivity. And we'll say use color, but I'll probably plug this in here to base color. And I'll plug the color into emission color. So same thing, just a standard emissive shader. So I'll load in the alpha as well. And multiply the color by the alpha. Yeah, just for the emission color. And maybe I'll plug in the length of the color for the emission amount. And then, like I said before, we'll probably need to add some extra velocity to these projectiles to fake the motion blur to be quite extreme. So in the meantime, I'm going to enable velocity blur on the projectiles object, and I'll make another thing here. And while I'm at it, in the object, yeah, I'm forcing shield, and in here I am forcing projectiles. And in the next video we can come back and clean this up and make sure that these all have matte objects if they need them. So let's take a look at what these projectiles look like. I'll assign the material here. Well, there they are. So that feels pretty thin, and I guess I don't have motion blur, so let's enable that. Okay, let's go higher samples on this one. So it looks a bit thin, and I do have a width attribute, or I could just come over here and put down a p-scale, see if that works. Let's try width. Seems to be working. Obviously I need to switch off the environment light, which I believe I made a take for, so if I change this to no background, there we go. Something I'm missing from the shader is the transparency. So I multiplied the color, but I need to plug this alpha into opacity, I think it is. So that's okay as well. And last thing I want to do right now for these is just try our additional velocity. So here's our projectiles. I'm going to put down our angle and set V. Just completely override V actually with the normal. The normal is pointing this way, so I think that's what we want. Yeah, so something like that. So that's very blurred, and now it's appearing a bit thicker, so I'll reduce this a little bit. And that's pretty much what we want. So you can see it's not a perfect looking line. So the noise it still looks straight, but the noise has made the motion blur more interesting. So this might be a bit extreme or not enough. We'll see what it looks like in comp. We have the emission, the intensity. We could try not override that. Doesn't make much of a difference. That's fine for now. So that's our projectiles. And then that basic emission shader, actually I'm going to unplug this intensity. I just want the intensity to be 1. Or do I? Let's leave it 1. And I'm going to duplicate this and use it for the particles as well. So let's see how, let's go over here and see how these particle layers render. So we'll duplicate these again. We want a layer for each one of those. So there'll be the base particles, there will be particles outer, and particles inside. outside, no, particles outside and inside. So these layers might take a while to load in all of those points. Have I set a p-scale? Because if they're too big, it's definitely going to take a long time. So I do have a p-scale. We'll see if that's small enough. This is taking ages. Another thing I'm going to do is on these layers, just make sure that under rendering limits I have 0 reflection, 0 refraction, and also on the objects themselves I can take off all of this. Still pretty slow. So let's have a look here. So we do have motion blur on. I am only forcing the one layer of points. There's nothing else much going on. 6 pixel samples, I think it was. Could try switch off ray variance and stochastic. But yeah, they do look pretty chunky. So that value is definitely not low enough. And now there's nothing. So what have I done wrong? P-scale equals 0.001. Don't really see a reason for this not to be working. Unless that was just way too small. And we do actually want to include velocity motion blur on these as well. We don't have any denoising at the moment, and we're not rasterizing these into a volume, so we might need that motion blur just to help tie all of this together. So I guess that previous value was just too low. Let's try this one more time. And this is basically it. So we'll use the same p-scale value for all of those point layers. We set up a basic renderable tracer, so the projectile, and the shield. So I'll get all these layers prepped up and ready and set the masking, and in the next video I'll just recap all of the mantra stuff and then start to composite the layers we have before we carry on with the Houdini side of things. It's definitely taking too long here. I think 001 should have worked. You can also do stuff like make sure it's only visible to primary rays because we don't need anything else because it's completely emissive. You never know what's being picked up, but I mean at the moment we're forcing only one object, so it shouldn't be that the geos are interacting with anything else in the scene. So I'll give this one more try. Oh, that's much quicker. I think that's less about doing that and more reducing the scale enough of the points, and then obviously I had to click render to make sure it forced the points to reload at the correct scale. So there's our one particle layer, that looks okay. Might need to double check the velocities, but we can always do a test render and see what's broken. But it does look like there's some pretty extreme velocities in here. It actually looks like there's more than just the one layer of particles. But yeah, it's definitely just the merged version of those two. Looks pretty cool though. Let's pause that and go to inside. We just have to make sure all of these are doing remotely what they should be doing before I commit to rendering. I'm also just rendering all these layers on one laptop, so I can't really afford to continuously render out something that's completely broken. So same situation, I just need to reduce the point count, I mean the P scale. That looks fine as well, and just quickly check the outside. That looks fine as well. So let me double check all of that stuff and get stuff rendered out, and I'll see you in the next video.